everyone, it's Shannon here for Honeybee Stamps. In today's video, we are going to create this card featuring the Lace A2 cover plate and the awesome coordinating layered lace stencils. I'm going to start today's card with an A2 panel of 110-pound white cardstock. I like to use heavyweight cardstock when I'm working with intricate dies like the Lace A2 cover plate die. I'm going to grab this frame piece, center it over my panel, and then use a couple pieces of Micropore Tape to hold it in place, and then run it through my die cutting machine. You see we're left with this beautiful lacy panel that could be used on its own, but I've opted to use the inset die that's included in the set, positioned it inside my panel, and then ran it through, and then we're left with this super delicate and lacy panel. I love it. It's so beautiful. Now we're going to move on to the coordinating stencil set. This is the Layered Lace Layering Stencils. There are 5 6x6 stencils in this set, and each one of them are clearly labeled so you know which part of the image it is going to ink blend. We're going to start with this stencil here, which is the stencil for the scalloped border. I'm just going to position it over the panel and then tape it in place. Now the die I should say, actually impresses the scallop border, the roses, and the leaves into the paper, so it's really easy to line it all up. I'm going to start with 2 pinks for this scallop border, starting with a light pink, which is Spun Sugar, and I'm just going to quickly ink blend all of the openings in this stencil with that Spun Sugar. Now we're going to move on to Worn Lipstick, which is a darker pink, and we're going to create some gradations over the scallop border. This is a really beautiful way to add a little bit of interest to the stenciled image so it's not completely flat. It'll look a little bit more dimensional when we're done, and I love doing it. I pretty much do it every time I work with stencils. So now that I've finished ink blending a little bit of that worn lipstick at the edges of all the scallops, you can see it here. It has a really subtle, beautiful ombre look around the edge. Now we're going to move on to the roses. Again, the stencil is nicely labeled so you can know which part you're ink blending. I'll get it lined up. Again, use a couple pieces of tape to hold it in place. And I'm going to use reds for the roses, starting with Candied Apple. And again, I'm just going to quickly ink blend all the roses nice and flat with that Candied Apple. And once we finish with that, we'll move on to a darker shade of red, which is Fired Brick, and actually ink blend the edge of each of these roses a little bit with that Fired Brick to just add a little bit of interest to them. This is pretty subtle, but it really, I think, helps to add some more interest to these roses. They don't look so flat just by adding that little bit of darker color. I'll now remove the stencil here, and now we're ready to move on to the center part of our image. This stencil is labeled Inset Roses, and it will ink blend the roses in the very center of the panel, which is so cool that we can color those as well. I'm going to start with my reds again, and first with that Candied Apple, and quickly ink blend those 4 roses in the center. And then I'll move on to that Fired Brick to again ink blend a little side on each one of these roses, just a little bit to add, again, more interest. Once I finish with that, I'll remove the stencil, and we are ready for the leaves. So the leaf stencil, there's 2 parts. There is leaves for the kind of the outside part, so that's what I'm starting with right now. I'm going to place that and then grab 2 greens, starting with Shabby Shutters, and quickly ink blend all those leaves with that nice light, kind of sagey green color. And then we'll move on to our darker green, which is Peeled Paint, and ink blend in between each one of these roses, and by doing that, we'll kind of touch a little bit of the leaves to again create that ombre or gradation look over the leaf. I'll just continue to work my way around this frame, and once I finish with that stencil, we're ready for our final stencil, which is the Inset Leaves. So here's that stencil here. I'll just line it up with those leaves in the center of our panel, again using the same 2 inks, so starting with Shabby Shutters, quickly ink blend all of those leaves. Then I'll move on to Peeled Paint and carefully try to add some gradations to these leaves. I want to be careful not to completely cover or color them with that peeled paint, because then I won't have that beautiful kind of gradation, that ombre look, which is the whole point of introducing a second color, so we just have more depth. And here is the finished panel. I love how beautiful and lacy it looks. I love the concept of using layered stencils with a die cut image. I just think that's a very cool concept. So now we're going to move on to actually adding some black splatters. I have some Gonzai Tombi black watercolor here, and I'm going to quickly splatter the front of an A2 top folding white card base with some of that black ink, and then I'm going to grab my lacy panel and just splatter that upper left corner with the paint to add a little bit of that black there as well. I didn't want to completely cover it, but I just want to get a little bit of it there in the corner. We're now going to move on to our sentiment. I have the Bitty Buzzwords Be Mine honey cuts, and I die cut always the actual word out of black cardstock, and then I did the shadow layer out of white cardstock, and now I'm just going to glue the two together, and that's going to create part of our sentiment. It's a really beautiful, simple sentiment. I am going to keep the edges a little lifted up on the second half or the last few letters of that sentiment because I want to tuck in a sub-sentiment above it. So I'm going to use the Bitty Buzzwords Be Mine stamp set for a sub-sentiment, and it says love you. I am going to heat emboss it, so I applied some anti-static powder and then inked it up in Honeybee's embossing Watermark ink. Dipped into some white embossing powder, and now I'm just going to heat set with my heat tool. Now I'm ready to add this sentiment. I did trim it down to a strip. I'm now going to add it to the always, just add a little glue to the kind of shadow layer, and even tuck some of that the black always a little bit over that little sub sentiment. I've added foam adhesive to the back side of it, and now we're ready to kind of wrap this up. I'm going to start with that lacy frame and that lacy panel and add some liquid adhesive just to the very center and that bolder center frame. I want only a little bit of glue on this because I want to be able to lift up the edges. I'll then flip it over and trim off the overhang. I decided to go kind of askew. I thought that was kind of a cool look. Now you can see here I'm lifting up the edges of that panel just to add some more dimension. Now I'll remove the backing on my foam adhesive for my sentiment and just place it down, and that will actually complete my card. And I'll hold it to the camera so you can get a good look at all the details in this card. I really love how it turned out, and almost, dare I say, has a clean and simple look, which is kind of surprising since it's a very intricate die, but the very subtle coloring that we added with the ink blending and the stencils I think is just enough. And the beautiful kind of black splatters with the sentiment kind of brings it all in. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you have any questions about the products I used, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.